So we are talking to Collier Landry today. So glad to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we're so happy you're here in person, which is such a treat for us.
Yeah, it is. Local boy.
Yeah. Tell me, what is the first thing that you notice about people?
Probably their eyes. I think you realize that because I said.
Yeah, I have a blue ring around my eyes for those of you who can't see me.
Oh,
My eyes
he
are
did
very
mention
dark.
that right off the bat.
Yeah, and there's a blue ring that runs in my family. So you look at people's eyes when you first see them?
Yeah, and I think that...
Because you have really striking eyes.
I was going to say, that's the first thing I noticed on you, Collier.
I got them from my mother. She left me with these in a Louis Vuitton handbag.
Yes, the Louis Vuitton.
No, but in all seriousness, yeah, I look at eyes, and it's interesting when you just pose that question to me because, I'm a cinematographer, and obviously I do the podcast and things, but like that was my sort of the thing that I created when I came out to Hollywood, right? So I'm looking at people's faces all day long. I'm staring at them. And it's always their eyes. I'm always looking at like where the light is in their eyes and how they're but beyond that, even as a kid, the eyes immediately.
It's one of those tells. I mean, I think sometimes what I notice first is energy.
Sure.
But sometimes that comes through the eyes. You can see that kind of energetic, whatever it is, in the eyes, and then get it from there. So thank you for that. Thank you. I'm Laura Cathcart Robbins. This is the only one in the room, but I'm never the only one in this room because, as usual, my boyfriend, producer, and co-host, Scott Slaughter, who I call Hun, is here as well.
Hi, honey.
Hey, honey. So like I said, we're talking to filmmaker and podcaster Collier Landry. Really excited excited actually wouldn't be the right word for this, but I'm eager to talk about this, your story with you, because it's so epic. It's unbelievable. Kind of like, it's like you can't make this up. And I have seen footage of it. I've read articles. I've heard your podcast. So there's all this evidence to say that it is real, but it's just one of those things that you just don't ever think you're going to know somebody that this has happened to. How do you identify, Collier, just for the interview?
So what's interesting is you said, I'm going to ask you that. And I said, what do you mean? And we had this little back and forth. So this is how I identify. I identify as an 11-year-old boy who is currently still trapped in a 44-year-old man's body.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I wasn't going to say that. I was just going to make something sort of snarky and go, well, I'm, a 21-year-old, but, and we will get into my story. But one of the things that I realized is that I very much, in doing when I started the podcast and after I made the film, I realized that I can move on with my life now. But I'm still, the thing that probably the people say the most to me when they meet me is they're like, you have so much energy and you have so much like life, especially like hearing your story. Like this doesn't make sense.
Right.
And what's funny is, not to sort of jump ahead in our conversation, but when I was watching my film, A Murder in Mansfield, premiere in New York City, I had never seen the film. And I hadn't seen, especially the tapes of me on the witness stand.
We're definitely going to get into that because that killed me.
And I was looking at it and I'm going, I have not changed a bit.
Yeah.
I'm just older.
Yeah.
My mannerisms are the same. My inflections in my voice, my pattern of speech,
100%.
My sense of humor, it is all the same.
Yeah.
And recently, because people have been reaching out to me since I started the podcast, since obviously the film, but, I put the podcast on YouTube so they're watching it. And then some of my family members who I had never known existed, because I was abandoned by both sides of my family, which we'll talk about all that. But these sort of extended family members that I didn't know growing up had said to me, and this is the best compliment you can get. It said, when we watch you, you are a carbon copy of your mother.
Oh.
Everything that we remembered from meeting your mother and knowing your mother is embodied by you.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
It's cool.
All right, so we are going to talk about all that.
Yeah.
But thank you for that.
Yeah.
And so I'm just going to read something here because I wrote it out. Your dad was a well-loved small-town doctor.
Yep.
Your mom, who has been described as elegant and loved to shop, you guys were really close.
Yep.
In your podcast, Moving Past Murder, you tell the story of how your father murdered your mother when you were just 11 years old. And as the New York Post said, most true crime podcasters simply discuss murders that fascinate them, but you actually lived through one. So take me back to Mansfield, Ohio, on the night of December 31st, 1989, and tell me what happened.
So I went to bed probably around, my usual bedtime was about 8 o'clock, maybe 8:30. My grandmother, who was my father's mother, had just arrived to the house a little earlier. They were late coming there. And my mother had made dinner and things like that, and we were kind of waiting for them. I think it was chili, and because that was her thing, what she made around New Year's. So this was the night of December 30th, 1989. I kissed my mother goodnight, kissed my grandmother. I said, "I love you, Mommy," and I went to bed. I woke up later on that evening at about 3:15 in the morning, and to a scream. I wasn't sure where it was. I think it was from my sister. I don't know. My sister would have, like night tremors or whatever.
All right. Your sister was how old?
She was 3.
Okay.
And then I heard this really loud thud. And it literally scared the shit out of me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm laying there and I'm going, okay, what do I do? Do I get up? What is going on? But I'm like, okay, something's happening. And I hear this sort of, it sounds like my father's voice, muttering.
It's muffled through the walls. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then I hear the thud again, about another 30, 45 seconds, maybe a minute apart. I can't remember exactly. Another really loud thud. And I'm like, okay, something bad just happened. I think he just killed my mother. And
so that was intuitive, though, because a thud. Had there been violence before?
There had been violence, and my parents were going through a divorce, and my father had a very violent temper, and
he described himself as sleeping on the couch a lot.
Sure.
Yeah.
And mostly, I ended up finding out that the reason why he was sleeping on the couch is, he always said, "Oh, I came home late from the hospital or the office or whatever."
Yeah.
That was his sort of thing. It was mostly because he was coming home late from another woman's house. Sure. My father was a womanizer, and I didn't realize that at the time. Well, I began to realize it a few months before that when he introduced me to his girlfriend who was pregnant.
Yes. We'll get to her in a minute.
Yeah, we'll get to her in a minute. But so I counted these footsteps. There was about 12 of them as I walked down the hall, and I'm laying in bed. I'm staring at my Batman clock, which is on the wall, and it says 3:18 a.m. And I look, and I'm laying, and I can see out of because I always slept with my door open as a child. I still do now, actually. And I could see out of the corner of my eye, my peripheral vision, 2 feet land in the doorway and just stand there. And I'm just saying to myself, don't look up. Something is telling me, do not look up. And I 100% believe if that had happened, I wouldn't be sitting here today.
You believe that he would have
killed me. And look,
killed you too?
At that point, if I look up and he's got blood on his hands, or he's got this, or I get up and I run to the room and see my mother's dead body, it's not that difficult to dig a slightly bigger hole. I know that might sound really morbid to say, and I'm sure some people, it's, I think that it sometimes is jarring for people with the amount of ease that I speak about these things to them, because they're like, "Wow, do you realize what you're saying?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I definitely realize what I'm saying."
Yeah.
But it's my life. I mean, I can't change it. I just have to make the best of it, obviously, and we'll get into all that. But that was what happened.
So I'm sorry, I just want to interrupt for a quick second. Everything you heard to your ears sounded like it was happening on the same floor where you were.
It was definitely happening on the same floor.
Right. Because later on we hear something about downstairs, but
yes.
But this was all happening on the second floor of your home.
Correct.
In the bedrooms.
Yep.
Okay. So the next morning.
So I went back to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
The footsteps left. The feet left. I went back to sleep. I woke up a few hours later. This was like 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. Ran to my mother's room and I start rummaging through the sheets. And the sheets are all a mess. It's like some of the sheets are missing. It's weird. But I'm looking for blood. I'm looking for blood. I don't see any. I come downstairs and my father is on the couch. And my father is sitting there with a towel wrapped. He just got out of the shower. Towel wrapped around him. And I look at him and I say, "Where is my mother?"
Right.
And he kind of looks up at me. I go, "Where is my mother?" And he goes, "Well, Mommy took a little vacation, Collier." And right then and there, I was like, "Oh, you murdered my mother." Like, there's, Mommy took a little vacation, Collier?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, Mommy just took a little vacation. I mean, pretty much sounds like it would be the start of any true crime podcast. Oh, Mommy took a little vacation. So he then my grandmother comes in,
and this is his mother.
His mother, who was very close to my mother. My mother was not close to her mother. My mother's mother had passed away a couple of years earlier, but they would go shopping together. People would often say, "Is this your daughter?" Mm-hmm. Like they dressed very similar. They had a lot of style. My grandmother had a lot of style, a lot of panache, and they just really got along well. And so.
And she had also been sleeping in the house.
Yeah, she was downstairs.
Okay.
In our guest room.
Okay.
And I then went, before that, I went to find my sister. And I said, "What happened to Mommy?
Mm-hmm.
Where's Mommy?"
And you're 11 and your sister's 3.
And she's 3, yeah. And she was adopted from Taiwan 6 months before that by my parents.
Okay. And
specifically by my mother. So I say to her, "Where's Mommy?" And she said, "I don't know, Guga." So Guga is Chinese for brother, or Mandarin for brother. She said, "Guga, I don't know. I don't know." Like, I don't know. Mm-hmm. And my grandmother comes over and she's like, "Your father wants to see you." And she takes Elizabeth and I go into the living room. My father is like, wants to have this conversation. And he's like, "Yeah." And then he starts to tell me this whole story on how my mother, because I mentioned the thuds, and he said, "Oh, what happened is Mommy threw her purse at me."
Mm-hmm.
Now, I literally in the trial am describing this as a body hitting a wall because that's what it sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah. You actually hit the witness stand.
I did.
With both your hands. I think you stood up for the second hit to emphasize how much of a loud, what's the word I'm looking for?
Thud.
Yeah. But just like a powerful sound it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you heard the thuds. I know you mentioned your sister scream, thinking that maybe you went back to her thinking maybe she had heard something. Right, because you thought it was her screaming. But when did you find the Polaroid with your dad?
Well, we're gonna jump in time a little bit, but let me finish this.
Yeah.
So I say to my father has this whole story on how I heard the purse. It was my mother's purse. She threw it at him. She came downstairs. He was on the couch, had accosted him. Obviously, if she threw it upstairs and downstairs, already the stories don't match up.
Right.
And he says that my mother threw credit cards at him and started yelling at him and then got into a car at the end of the driveway. Now, it was we're from Ohio. It is New Year's Eve. There's snow on the ground. Mm-hmm. And my mother was not about ready to go schlepping down a driveway without her kids in the middle of the night. I mean, it just was so ridiculous.
Right.
And she got in a car and the car drove away. Yeah. So first of all, let's just cut to the chase of the fact that a woman, when she's getting in a fight with her husband, is not going to throw her credit cards at him. That's the last thing. If she's trying to get out, she's not going to throw the source
unless
of money
that
she's
don't
going
work.
to, exactly. Unless they're the ones that are maxed out.
Yeah.
So that already doesn't make any sense. So I'm just listening to me. He says to me, we're not going to call the police. And then he says, we're not going to call the FBI. And my spidey sense, I'm like, we're in Mansfield, Ohio, bro. Like, we're not going to, the FBI, like, now what is this, Tommy Lee Jones coming? Like, what, like,
right,
the FBI?
right.
Like, what are we talking about here? So that was already red flag. So my father leaves with my grandmother. My grandma's like, you can't do, your father said no calling the police, no this and that. So I go upstairs, and I had hidden some phone numbers of my mother's friends into a Garfield cap so I could remember them in this little stuffed Garfield that I had, little Santa Garfield in the hat. My mother had just gotten a portable phone, like the little, whatever. And so I ran into the bathroom and I started calling the numbers. And I told people what happened. And I said, you need to call the police. Because I can't call the police, but you need to call the police. Because they're not going to believe me. Right? Because I was a kid. And so.
Was it a school day?
No, this is New Year's Eve. So we're still in school.
Yes.
I didn't go back to school for 2 more days.
Okay.
So what happened is so then, it was either that day or the next day. I think it was New Year's Day. 2 uniformed officers showed up at the house in a black and white, and my grandmother's hysterical and she's yelling at me saying, your father said not to talk to the police and blah, blah. You call the police and blah, blah. It was like all this stuff. Right. And I pull one of them aside and I'm like, look, and I told them what happened, but they're not like really, I'm a kid. I'm an 11-year-old kid. And I'm like, this is what happened. My parents were going through, like, I don't trust my father as far as I can throw him. That's what I said to the guy. I had taken him upstairs in the bedroom. They were looking around.
Your father wasn't home.
My father was not home.
Right.
So, and I did that in secret, like, because I already knew I was putting myself, my father was very violent with me. Like, so I'm taking a lot of risk already.
Right.
By even doing what I'm doing. But I'm like, fuck this. I know that you murdered my mother. Like, and you're not going to get away with it, you son of a bitch. So what happened is those guys left, and then I followed up with my mom's friends running around because I can outrun a 72-year-old woman with this cordless phone that my mom had gotten, hiding in the bathroom, hiding in the closet, calling them. And they said, okay, it's a missing persons case, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, that's bullshit. What happened is a detective, because it's sort of slow in a sleepy small town in mid-Ohio, looked at this and goes, a doctor's wife went missing? Comes to the house. His name is David Messmore. Yeah. My grandmother refuses to let him in. And he's like, oh, blah, 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 blah. And I open the door and I let him in. And my grandmother is furious, and she goes and calls my father to tell him that I'm talking to this police officer. I pull Dave Messmore aside and I said, you need to listen to me. My mother is dead. She would never leave me. My father killed her. This is what happened. And he's like, okay. So he gave me his card. I hid it. Next day, like later on that night, I think this was New Year's Day, my father's girlfriend came and prepared us like New Year's dinner or whatever, some pork roast. It was horrible.
You'd met her before?
I had met her before because I had discovered that this is Sherry.
Yeah.
I discovered that she was his girlfriend because my father had like French kissed her. That sounds so stupid thing. But I was like, oh, it wasn't a friendly kiss. And I had told my mom about it because he told me to lie. I told my mom about it because I felt guilty. This was on Father's Day of 1989. And my mother said, thank you for being honest with me. I thank you for finally telling me the truth. But that was that was the line in the sand. My mother knew about my father's constant affairs and even knew about this woman and that she was pregnant. But I guess their deal was, if you involve our son, that's it. I'm filing for divorce and we're done.
Breaker.
We're done. That's the deal breaker. You can do whatever the fuck you want. But the moment you involve Collier, it's done. And he did. He crossed that line because he's a narcissist and a sociopath. So he's like, well, I'm just going to do whatever I want. Fuck you. So I go back to school like January 2nd or 3rd. I say to the principal of my school, I said, here's this guy, here's a card. You need to call him and tell him to come down to the school. Because I'm like, this is my only time that I have away from my house that I can talk to the police.
So you're like operating as an agent at school.
100%.
Yeah.
Dave Messmore comes to school and I just spill all the tea. I'm like, this is what happened. This is, my parents were going through divorce. My father was violent, but I told him everything. I was like, this is what this is. And I said, when I go home, I'm going to go upstairs. My grandmother will be dealing with my sister for a minute. I'm going to go upstairs. I'm going to pull the bookshelves out of the wall and look for my mother's body. These are the conversations I'm having at 11 years old with a police officer who's literally looking at me like I'm crazy.
Yeah.
But the thing is that my parents were very into education. They both went to Penn. And education was so I was a very articulate kid, and I was very good at expressing myself and communicating, and he, as in later I find out that he's like, the captain was like, we're not investigating this guy. He goes, but this kid won't leave me alone.
Yeah.
Because every day I'm calling him from school. Like, I don't care. I'm not going to class. My mother is gone. Like, I'm going to find out what happened. So I would tell him things like, I'm going to go home today and search for her purse because she wouldn't leave without this one particular purse. I'm going to search for this, pull these shelves out, look in the basement. Like, I was looking for clues everywhere, for blood, for this, that. I mean, I was on a mission.
So wait, I want to stop you for a second. Because I want to make sure we have time to cover everything I want to cover. But two, you're on a mission at 11. I got that.
Yeah.
Were you grieving also at this time?
I think so, but I think when you're going through something like this, time is of the essence, and I didn't really have time to grieve.
So did you think? But you think she's dead?
I know she's dead. I don't think.
She's dead. So your mission is for justice.
And here's the thing: is that I kept thinking the whole time. I remember when my grandfather passed away, when my grandmother, her mother, passed away. My mother took me to the funeral, and she said, "Collier, you can't cry. We need to be strong for Pop, her father, the husband." And I remember saying that to myself, like, I need to be strong for my mother. Like, I can't cry. I can't do this.
Yeah.
I can't, because this motherfucker is not going to win.
Right.
So what happened so I'm working as this double agent. I go with my father. This is mid-January 1990. My father stops at a gas station. He goes inside to pay for gas so I can see him through the window. I lift up the glove box, the console, and I'm rummaging through it while I'm looking at him. I find 2 Polaroids. One is of a house, and the other one, right behind it, is his girlfriend sitting in front with her 2 kids, sitting in front of a fireplace that's covered in plastic. Which in my head, said, alarm bells, this is a new house.
Yeah.
That I don't recognize.
Yeah.
I tell police about that. It was 2 weeks later when they found her, but, or not even 2 weeks later. What happened is that then, a couple of days after that, like, as I'm working with this guy, Dave Messmore, the detective Dave Messmore, he said, my father comes to me and he goes, I have a medical convention in Florida I want to take you to. You can come with me. It'll be a nice little trip. And I'm like, okay. So I've been able to swim since I was age 4. So I'm almost 12 years old at this time. I'm like a month out of my 12th birthday. I say to Messmore, I go to school the next day, I said, my father wants to take me to Florida for a medical convention. I've been able to swim since age 4. I'm going to drown in the Gulf of Mexico. You need to get me the fuck out of that house. I didn't use the F word, but I'm like, you need to get me out of my house. Like, he's going to kill me.
Yeah.
I'm next. And him realizing that this is potentially the only witness we have in a murder case. So I had told him about the house. January 24th, 1990, I wake up, 2 strangers in my bedroom. They're like, you got 20 minutes, pack a bag, you're out of here. I come downstairs, the whole place is crawling with cops, the crime lab, everything like that. I'm like, okay, it's going down, right?
It's going down.
I see my dog. I'm like, my dog. They're like, we can't take your dog, and this, that, and the other. Which is the last time I saw my dog. And I go into foster care, and that night I have like the worst asthma attack of my life. I end up like getting through the night. I don't know how. I thought I was going to die. Go to the hospital the next morning, and a friend of the family is there. He's a doctor. He gives me a breathing treatment. But before I go into that room, there's a bunch of people in the lobby, and there's an honor box where the newspapers, for those of you that remember newspapers, in the honor box, I'm shuffled past that so I don't see it.
Right,
which I thought was odd. Which I thought was super odd.
Yeah.
Because this was through the town, this was big news. Like, this woman has gone missing. She was loved in the community, and she just vanished without her kids. And over the time, like, my dad has lawyers, and I don't know, and it's the whole story, right? So, anyways, I get the breathing treatment. After they've calmed me down or whatever, they go, okay, Lieutenant Messmore found your mother, and then it's like an eternity, and they said, and she was dead. And I literally, the first words out of my mouth were, that bastard. Mm-hmm. And that's when it hit me. Like, I was like, you have that moment, even though she's dead, when Lieutenant Messmore found your mom, and she was great, and she's okay now.
Right.
but no.
Even though you knew you hadn't had that confirmation coming from the outside.
Sure.
Yeah.
And they found her body underneath the basement floor of this house that I found the photo of.
Which was in
Erie, Pennsylvania.
In Erie,
the next state over.
So a couple of things. Why did you end up in foster care? How you had family? How come nobody?
So my mother's side of the family, my father had allegedly molested both of their daughters a couple of years before under the guise of I do ask him that. Yeah. And then and they did not want me because I looked like my father. That was even though I don't look like I look like my mother.
But you reminded him.
I was a male. Yeah. They're like, we can't. They're literally verbatim. We
so
can't.
They
take
were
you.
traumatized.
They were traumatized,
and they thought your presence there would re-traumatize them.
And so they were like, we'll leave you to the wolves. And then my father's side of the family was like, we'll leave you to the wolves. You're trying to, get your father arrested. You've got your father arrested. You're the reason he's arrested. Because I testified against the grand jury because I was like man on fire. Like I'm Denzel. Like the whole fucking place is going to burn.
Right.
Like the ships have been burned. There's no choice. This is going to happen. And so I went into the foster care system, which was not a good situation.
Right.
But I don't know how I did it, but
you did.
I was,
So I'm sorry. When you were the courtroom footage that I saw, you were 12.
I was 12.
And you were currently in foster care then.
I was in foster care.
Okay, so let's move to the trial.
Yep.
The video of you is crazy. It's so compelling.
Yeah.
You are this super composed, super bright, funny, articulate. It almost looks like you're on.
For sure.
Like you had you been coached at all? Because
you
said exactly the right thing.
No, so that's the thing. And I've been interviewed and people have asked this, and then my father came out and said, oh, he was coached, he was this and that. I'm going to tell you something, and listeners should really take heed of this.
Yeah.
The easiest thing in the world to remember is the truth. So when it comes out, it's so pure it flows because it's pure. So when people were saying you were coached, I'm like, no, I wasn't. I was telling the truth. And I have a mind like a steel trap.
Yes,
I still do.
Yeah.
I have a memory of an elephant. And that's the thing that ultimately led. And when I was being cross-examined by my father's lawyers, I was correcting them. I'm like, no, you're not going to say this is what happened. Like, you're not going to try to dance around this. Because I was very much like, you motherfuckers. Like, it is me versus you. My dad has this team of lawyers.
Right.
And I'm going to say, hey, like, this is it.
Well, and
it was a showdown.
His patients had raised $80,000.
Yeah, something like that.
For his defense. So you just talked about me against the world. Did you feel like, because you were the only one in the room, that's a really only one in the room moment. Did you feel like the only one who knew and believed the truth?
Absolutely. 100%. And then they tried to not get me to testify. The prosecutor and Dave Messmore and everybody were like, Collier, you don't have to testify. I'm literally like, over my dead body, I don't testify.
Right.
This is it. Like, this is for all the marbles. Like, this is like my mother used to have this saying, like, you grab the brass ring, right?
Yeah.
Which is alluding to the carousel horses in the 1950s or whatever. And, that was like, I was like, this is it, because my life is already over as I know it. Hands down. If my father gets acquitted, my life is most likely going to be over physically in a matter of months to years.
He was remanded to custody, he
was remanded to custody, or he is going to make my life a living hell until he takes his last breath.
Right.
So either way, and it's like I had to just, when you are faced with circumstances of that magnitude, like it's there, all the chips are out. Like I'm all in.
Yeah.
And I knew, because I was telling the truth and I knew what I heard, I knew I stood on the side of good or whatever, however you want to view this, is a battle between good and evil or whatever.
Where you were right.
But I was right. I know what I heard, and I wasn't, and I will be damned if I don't go down without a fight.
Yeah.
Because I'm the only one fighting for my mother.
Yes.
At that point.
Yeah. The murder trial was shown on TV.
Yeah.
It turned into such a sensation that the streets of Mansfield, population 46,000.
I don't think now.
I think it was less,
like 30
right?
or 25 or something. Yeah.
So, but all the streets would be empty on the days that you were on the stand.
Oh yeah.
Someone at the trial looked almost giddy. This is me watching the footage, saying that she described it, when watching it in person, it was better than a soap opera,
Yeah,
she says.
it's like a movie, yeah.
But this was your real life.
Yeah.
So how did that impact you when you were off the stand? Like, you're in this very small fishbowl of a town.
So, obviously my father gets convicted, right? And I go...
But let's talk about that for a second. What was he convicted of?
He was convicted of aggravated murder and abuse of a corpse. So aggravated murder is premeditated murder, because the murder was premeditated. It wasn't a crime of passion. People see the movie, they're like, oh, he did it. They got into a fight. I was like, no. He rented the jackhammer. He bought the house. He asked about lowering the basement floor to bury her.
Yeah.
He bought all these things.
All in advance.
All of this stuff is in advance. So it was premeditated murder and abuse of a corpse, which is, he buried her on the floor. So it's abuse of a corpse. So I end up I wanted to be adopted by Dave Messmore, who is the lieutenant, because we became close after the trial, and I would go to their house and hang out, but that didn't happen. The judge wouldn't let me go there. I was adopted by another family who I sort of knew from my school, but I didn't know. I was adopted by strangers, essentially. And they're wonderful people, and that was wonderful, right? Kids should be so lucky. But growing up in this small town, when I would walk into the room, everybody would be like, oh, that's that kid, that's the Boyle
that's
kid.
The boy, yeah.
I was known as the Boyle kid. All I ever wanted to do was to be known on my own merits. Now, I had talents, and I was junior and senior high school class president. I was like the school star because I found my voice literally when I was like a sophomore in high school, became like the school singer and whatever. But I graduated high school. I wanted to go to New York to try to make it on Broadway. I had somebody convince me to go to school, because I was like, oh, can I study music in school? I went to conservatory for 2.5 years. I dropped out and I moved to Los Angeles because I wanted to tell my story.
Right.
And I wanted to figure out a way to do that. And I came out here, I worked as a model for years, and then I was doing music stuff, and then that didn't work out. And I was like, okay, well, what else do I like? Oh, I'm really passionate about photography. And then I realized, oh, I can make movies and I can learn.
Yeah.
And this is how I'm going to tell my story. But what it really impacted me is I saw a film in 1999 called American History X. And that film is top 5 in American cinema, in my opinion. But when I left the theater, I was with my friend who's African-American. And obviously, if people know the film, it's a very racial film and about violence, but it's about the consequences of violence.
Right.
And we're just like stunned. And I go, you know what, man? I was like, whoever made that film understands the consequences of violence. Because I was so passionate about it. Because at that time, now it's very fashionable to think about victims and all of these things that impact people and violence. But it wasn't back then. It was like gavel hit, bad guy goes to jail, gavel hits, state gets its restitution, victim is dead, next. We don't think about the secondary victims, the non-combat PTSD, the impacts on communities and families and right?
Yeah.
The ancillary victims. And so I said, whoever did that film understands that. Flash forward 10 years later, my girlfriend comes into my office, we have this little bungalow in Hollywood. She says, this movie producer wants to shoot me for a book. He's done all these films, and she starts rattling them off, and she says, American History. And I said, American History X. And she's like, yeah, that's the film. I was like, get him over here. She had met him through MySpace. We became friends. His name was John Morrissey. And he was looking for a project a couple of years later, but we were friends. And I said, he wanted to do something silly. And I was like, no, this is what you should do. I want to do a docuseries about the consequences of violence in America. You made American fucking History X, man. Like, this is what we should do. And the best news is I own the rights to the pilot. I gave him a book of all the newspaper clippings of the trial from when my mother went missing to the turn of the millennium. Yeah. My life. I gave it to him. He reads it. He calls up the next day. He's like, are you fucking kidding me? This is your life? Because nobody knew my story when I moved out here, other than the fact that the only thing they knew was, my dad killed my mom. That's it. And I'm from Ohio. I didn't really, because I did not want that to lead me into a room. I wanted to be known on my merits and for my skill set and who I am as a person, and not let my past precede me into the room.
Sure.
And
well, I'm just going to interrupt you again.
Sure. Because
what is so amazing, because I understood that you testified against your father.
Yeah.
What I didn't know before I talked to you, before I started looking, like, you were the lead detective on the case.
Well,
and in addition to testifying,
it was me and Dave Messmore. We put it together.
But you got him there.
Yeah.
You're sounding the alarm. Had you been too scared, had you not felt like you needed to speak for your mother, that it was not your duty to do this for her, it would have gone a completely different way.
Totally.
And it's just amazing to me that this 11-year-old boy turned 12-year-old boy, so confident in his testimony on the stand. There's enough evidence to put your father away for the murder that you knew that he did.
Yeah.
And then so this guy comes back into your life, and you decided you're going to make art out of what's happened to you to kind of reconcile it. I know that you said your podcast is cathartic for you.
Oh, 100%.
Was making the film cathartic as well?
Absolutely. So when I set out to make the film, so what happened is John said, I just did a film with Barbara Koppel. She's won 2 Academy Awards for documentaries. She'd probably be interested in this. And then we proceeded to put it all together over the course of like the next 7 years. Pitched it to ID, Investigation, Discovery. They loved it. They're like, okay, we want to do this. It was supposed to be an hour special and ended up being a full-fledged documentary because we had so much footage. So I set out on the film. We get emotional. I set out to, and I did a TED Talk about this. Like, I always wanted to know why my father murdered my mother. And that was like my driving force since 11. And I wanted to heal myself. But most importantly, I wanted to speak to that one person, that one kid who's sitting there literally in the nadir of their life. And say to that kid, you're going to be okay, man. It's going to be okay. And unbeknownst to me, like, the film spoke to thousands of people.
Yeah.
And, you talk about me sounding the alarm bells. And what's really sad is that this is not uncommon in the United States or in the world even, but, that domestic violence happens. The woman goes missing. It's mostly females that are victims of these crimes. Let's just keep it real. And, they are treated as missing persons, and they're often not found. I mean, look at Robert Durst's wife, right?
Mm-hmm.
Kathleen McCormick or whatever her name is. You have these things that they go unsolved, or they don't get those answers. They don't get they don't get that closure. The victims and their families don't get that closure. I mean, I'm so lucky, and I mean, you probably not to have a sardonic sense of humor. You can blame this on the fact that my mother never let me get a Nintendo until the Christmas that week she was murdered. I finally got a Nintendo as the last kid on the block. So I was very preoccupied with studying and all these other things. So maybe that's why you can blame it. But no, in all seriousness, is these things just, I was really lucky, and I think my mother was really lucky that she had that sort of advocate for her.
Oh my goodness.
And the thing is that with the film and then with the podcast, I'm able to discuss these things in a way. Like, I just came back from CrimeCon, and not to discount anyone's journey, because it's fucking hard. Like, trust me. Like, I put on a good face. This shit is fucking hard. Mm-hmm. And the thing is that it doesn't get any easier. It only gets harder. Yeah. The more you talk about it and the more you do this. But it's like this. There's something that I read, like somebody sent me this Instagram quote, whatever. And it said that people who have been through extraordinary challenges and circumstances have a fire that burns inside them that is almost inextinguishable. And that's what it was for me. And it was like, I have to tell a story. I have to talk about this, because the conversations I'm having, like when I was at CrimeCon, like I'm listening to some of these victims on stage and they can hardly talk about these things. And it's like, I have that gift of gab, and I can talk about these things. I can stand up and command a stage and tell people, like, this is going to, and show them it's going to be okay. You're going to fucking make it, man. Yeah. Like, you really are. And it's amazing to hear the impact when people reach out to me on social media and they listen to the podcast or they've seen the film and they've come through this stuff. They've been like, God, like, I discovered you. I'm like, jeez. I thought, it's always this sort of, it's funny to me, but to them, they're like, I'm so sorry for saying this, but like, I thought my life was fucked up until I met you.
Right.
But then I see that you're living and you're doing these things and you have this amazing life, and you've done the work, and you continue to share your story with this just open and honest authenticity. that really connects to people. And that's so amazing, because at the end of the day, all I wanted to fucking do, all I am is this little boy that loved his mom, loved his mother, and wanted justice for her. And I just wanted, that's all I wanted.
And you wanted to know, right?
Yeah, I wanted to know.
So I want to use the last 5 minutes we have to, I just want to say that from time to time, you put money in your father's prison commissary account.
I did. I mean, I don't anymore.
Right, but you did.
Yeah.
But I've because you were going to see him to do this interview at some point, right? You were going to.
Yeah, I continued to have a relationship with my father, because I was also like just trying to move through my process of all this still.
Yeah.
And I just realized he's a sociopath, and I never confronted him. But like when people see the film, like my father comes into the room in the film with a smile on his face and this whole thing, because he thinks that I am making a film with my friend John Morrissey to help him get out of prison. That's what he thinks.
He does. And that's, I mean, I didn't know that, but I knew that from the way he welcomed you. So,
and then I hit him with ever since you murdered my mother.
Right. That's the first thing you say.
Changes.
So just tell me, we're going to, like I said, use this last 5 minutes. Tell me about that visit and the answers you got or didn't get.
Well, I mean, it was, the interview was an hour, and I was talking to him, but, and he has these stories, and I'm like, I don't believe you. And when I say this and he's telling these stories, like, I mean, sometimes like, I'd be in the theater and I'd be standing in the back and the whole theater would just erupt in applause. I'm like, I don't believe you. And people are going, just like, because it's like this story of like the prodigal son returns to like take down his father, and to be like, I'm now holding you accountable. Like all that, the whole 26 years led up to that moment of me confronting him and him just not having anything. Just it's lie after lie. And he believes the lie. And when I walk out of the room, before he walks out of the room, I say to him, I believe that you believe that.
You do.
And there's my answer. That's my answer.
Well, what is the answer that he gave you? The explanation?
He didn't give me any answer. And that is your answer.
Right.
Because he's incapable of doing it. Because that's how far gone he is.
Yeah.
And you have to be willing to accept that. And the thing is that we put these sort of expectations on getting these answers. Like, and the TED Talk is, what if the answer you seek is not the answer you need, right? Mm-hmm. We put these expectations on, I have to understand this. Like I went as far as to move to Hollywood to then get a 2-time Oscar and to direct a film about me, to find out really all I wanted to do was, why'd you murder my mother? All of it.
Right.
And I don't get that answer. And people are like, well, how did you get it? I'm like, no, what I got was better, because I saw that he's incapable. And that is my answer. And when somebody from the New York Times contacted me when the film came out, they go, you know what struck me as the most interesting thing about you that tells me everything about your character in about 3 seconds? I said, what is that? He goes, when your father, after the whole interview thing, you get up and you hug him and you say, I love you, Pop.
Yeah.
It's like, that tells me everything I need to know about you as a human being.
Yeah. I mean, that was surreal. And so during that hour, he admits that he killed her, but he says it was accidental.
It was accidental. It happened downstairs. He pushed her. She hit her head. Then he sort of backtracked. And I say,
he was scared of her face, so he put a bag over her head.
That's why she was suffocated. I mean, it's lunacy.
But he doesn't tell you why.
Doesn't.
But he does admit that it was by his hand that she died. But he doesn't ever say he murdered her.
I'm responsible for her death. It's all this stuff.
Yeah, so it's frustrating. And then to see you get up and hug him at the end is like, I felt that you operated in so much integrity at that moment with this man who you were so tied to for so many different reasons, who, like you said, you can see in that clip, he's not the clip, but that footage, he is incapable of giving you what you want. You're not going to get it from him.
No.
So... yeah, I think that's our time, but boy, I can't believe that we got through almost everything I wanted to get through in this hour. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about this.
You're welcome.
Podcast is called Moving Past Murder.
Moving Past Murder.
Film is called Murder in Mansfield.
A Murder in Mansfield on ID. Yep.
And where can people find you? You
can find me at my website, collierlandry.com. You can find me on all social medias. Instagram at Collier Landry, TikTok at Collier Landry. I mean, everything is all at Collier Landry.
Right.
And, I have a Patreon, patreon.com, Collier Landry. It all supports the podcast and everything that I'm doing. And I love podcasting and I love being on your show. And it's so, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I'm
and thank you
so
to Christine O'Donnell. I'm part of the Brightside
Yes,
Network. So,
shout out to Christine O'Donnell because she just started a network and you're part of it.
I am a part of it.
I'm scheduling myself to have a meeting with her soon. So shout out to you, Christine. Thank you so much for this. And thank you, Collier.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Collier.
My pleasure. Thanks, Scott.